This is a little half-scale dress form. It looks smaller than half-scale, but all of the numbers from the waist and the neck and all of the lengths are divided exactly in half, and this is a size 8 half-scale dress form. So I've got the side where you can actually see the dress form, and then I've started pinning a basic pattern, the creation of a basic pattern around it. So what I have done, instead of using gingham, which is usually my preferred fabric of choice, I have taken a rectangular piece of fabric that goes up above the shoulder and down below where the thigh area would be, so that it's at the point where the body straightens out, so that that covers from above to below that, and it goes further than from the center front around past the center back. And this is the way I like to create a basic pattern, whether my first initial one, whether I'm draping a pattern for a person, a costume, or for mass production. This is how I would start. It's not the traditional way, but I like it the best because I can work on balancing the pattern, and it helps a lot if you understand how to keep a pattern balanced. It ends up fitting a lot better in the long run. So the dress forms are hand put together, and this is where somebody has hand sewed it, and so it's not quite perfectly plumb, straight, level, parallel to the walls. It's a little bit angled. So when I finish figuring that out, I have to take it off the dress form and rebalance it. So the actual center is going to be where I've got that blue line. And I'm calculating where the armhole is going to be based on halfway between my two fingers right there, because that's where the bottom of the armhole has to be. So straight down from that, I've got a perpendicular line. And I won't be using that, but mentally that's what I'm thinking about when I'm draping. I've been careful to line up this center front with where I can feel the center front seam, and I'll feel it with my fingernail, but after I've got it lined up with that actual line, I'll step back and make sure that it's actually perpendicular to the floor, parallel to the walls. And then I've got a horizontal line, and I've taken care to put that right on one of the threads. All of those lines that cross over the center front line that are level with the floor, these are each right angles, those sections. So as I'm deciding where to put this, I can't just throw the fabric on the dress form. The fabric is on the dress form with the grain going parallel to the floor in the horizontal and parallel to the walls in the vertical. The vertical line is parallel to the selvage edge. So I don't think I have an actual selvage edge on this side, but that's where it would be. I don't want to put the selvage right down the center front because it's usually a little bit tighter of a weave, so I usually will cut that off and press it very carefully. And I think this was an old piece of fabric and I didn't get quite all the wrinkles out, but the more smooth you have it before you start, the easier this is to do. So as I'm thinking this through, I've got my front set up first, and then as I rotate it around, I want to look to see that this line is looking level all the way around, so I might have to tug on that and make sure that it's level. My front and my back are going to be the same level line, same distance from the floor, but you can usually tell that just by looking at it as it goes by. but that one little pin seems to be out of place, so I want to let that drop down a little. And I'll get into more detail and zoom in on it, but at first I just want you to see that we've got a grid forming around the dress form, and you're starting from parallel, vertical, horizontal. And this one isn't quite, so I would need to pull that one over. And when I've got it lined up that way, I will usually stand back and look at whoever it is, if I'm draping a live person or a dress form, or I'm using a company standard fit. When I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the lower level, and I want it to be a smooth tube. I don't want anything to be pulled up or pulled down so that it's shooting out. I want it to be a perfectly smooth tube shape. And then I know it's going to hang nicely as a pencil skirt. And that's my beginning. I've zoomed in a little bit so you can see a close-up view of the top section. This process is going to work the same whether I'm half scale or full scale, or working on a body that's shaped a little bit different. I've even had students do dolls, but they're a lot more difficult to do. So half scale is the perfect size for us to be working on. It takes up less time and paper and space, and it's a good way to learn, and it's a traditional way of learning. So when I'm getting started, I need to find the shape of the pattern piece, and the outer edge of the pattern piece is what determines how well it fits. So I'm going to take my scissors, and you have to be careful about doing that on a live person. I usually make my first cut straight with the grain, but that's the only one. The rest of them are going to be angled. So if I look for the plane change, and by plane that's like a geometry plane change, the neck is a plane and the neck area below is a plane, and where they touch is where the plane changes. So that's right where that line is, and I'm going to put the scissors right there where the plane changes and just lay the fabric into it and go ahead and clip. And that way I don't clip past. And typically if I'm working on a real person, I don't clip them either. But if I'm working on a real person, I always put my hand between the scissors and the person. So for example, if I'm coming out this way, I need to clip again about 1/4 of an inch away. And I'll clip into the neckline. You want to make sure that you've got scissors that the very end is sharp too. But do you see how that's starting to lay nicely? And I'm clipping toward the center of the neck as if I've got a wagon wheel spoke, and I'm clipping all the way into the center. So I'm aiming at the center, and I'm going to put a pin in that so that it stays where it belongs. When you're making a pattern, unless you've got somebody that's really crooked, and even then I like to start by making a pattern for just the one side, and then you just use it on the fold. So I'm working my way around. Typically I start by making sure you've got that nice tube shape at the bottom, and then when that's anchored into place with that tube shape at the bottom, then you can work your way around the neck area so that it will stay there. So do you see how as I clip that, aiming in toward the center of the neck, it's starting to lay flat, and I'm finding the shape of my shoulder. I'm going to trim off a little bit of the top of that. Okay, so that's laying nice and smooth. And I have what's going to be a dart right here. Traditionally, you usually see the dart come in from the side or from the center of the shoulder, but I like it this way. I just have to be careful that when I take this dart out, I don't squeeze it really tight and take out all of the ease. On a full scale person, you want to be able to stick 2 fingers in there. So on a half scale person, I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of ease right there too. So tentatively, this is where my dart's going to go, but I'm going to wait to finalize that until I get a little bit further. Okay, so I've got my neck on that side, and because I'm using 1 piece of fabric, I'm going to go ahead and trim that out. So I now have a straight line coming down, and there's my shoulder. So I'm going to move that dart a little bit more to the side. And I don't want to go too low with that. So what we're thinking about on the other side, and you can see from this side, is that I've got a plane change here, and where they meet, where my fingers are touching, that's where the 2 planes are coming together as it comes around. And that's usually pretty easy to see around this area of the arm. If you put your arm straight out to your side and raise and lower it, this little spot right here is the point that doesn't really move. It kind of dents in. So that's where your sleeve seam usually goes. So I've marked this one. You can see how it's coming to the 2 plane changes around through here. Then I found the bottom edge of where the armpit would be. It's not uncommon to lower it a little bit from the armpit. And then I've got 2 right angles, 1 on each side, and that's where the seam is going to be. So from there I just curved it up into where that plane change starts. And I want to make sure that halfway between these 2 is where my seam is going to be. So this is what I've done underneath the fabric on the other side. And I pinned it. Oh, I took a pin out right there, didn't I? So my plane change that I can feel is right here. Did that go in? Sometimes you get pins that aren't really sharp. They're kind of hard to work with. So halfway between those 2 marks is where my side seam is going to be. And this line is a little bit further out than it needs to be, but it's easier to have extra and then find where you want it to go rather than not have enough there. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin. I've pulled it in further, but by folding the fabric right down that line that I drew on a thread, so that's exactly on grain, by pinching it in right there, that's where my side seam is going to start. And I'm going to treat this like a dart, but I'm not going to take all of the material out. I'm going to start with these 2, but I have taken out what I need to take out right here. So in order to let the fabric lay nicely, I'm going to clip in just a little bit on each side. It's easier to not cut enough to begin with, and then when you're getting things put where they belong, then you can clip a little bit deeper. Okay, so that, and if the bottom of my armhole is right here, I need to clip a couple more times right here. And I'm going to do the back neck before I finish this area, but I have to make it so that the fabric will lay smoothly. So I'm just putting in a few more clips before I move to the back neck. Okay. So this is going to be laying nice and smooth right there. This is a pretty well established line. And if I tilt this down, you can see where the top of the shoulder is. I want to put my shoulder seam in. And have it fold right there. So I've smoothed that up. I can see where it is. And I want to leave seam allowance so that I can pin it. And I'm just going to cut off some of this so I have less bulk right here. But I want to leave enough that I can hold on to it and move it around. So that's how much I have left. And that's roughly a 1/2 inch. If you decide you want to do this, you can get a little half scale form or a larger form. And then on this side, I want to do the same thing, but it's going to have a dart. Okay, so my first one, I'm coming down from the top. And I want to make sure I don't go too far. And this is a scary way to be aiming at people. If you're working on a live person, they don't like you to come at them with the scissors like that. So I'm going to pull that out of the way. That is definitely not sharp. So I'm just going to push it to the side, and they're usually about 1/4 inch apart, half scale, and maybe 3/8 inch apart, full scale. You just want to move the fabric, and then when it starts to wrinkle and pucker, then you clip it again. So I'm always aiming in at the neck. So I'm bringing that out smoothly, and I'm going to just pull that completely out of the way. And bring this one over so that I get that same smooth line over here. There. So that's laying nicely right there. I don't want to trim off as much yet because I'm going to put a dart in, but I am going to get some of this out of the way. Okay. So that's smooth. I don't have any puckering. I would if I was coming further forward, but that is laying very nice. But look back here. Do you see where here on the side where the armhole is, I've got this extra amount. So I'm going to push that up into the shoulder, because you don't see a dart coming in from the side. We might end up putting that in a yoke, but that's where, imagine if you want to feel your shoulder, you've got a shoulder blade at the top and the bottom. You've got a area for it to aim at the top and the bottom of your shoulder blade, your scapula. So this is coming over here, and you don't want to make it too big. That's why I've anchored this one, because I could pull more up into there, but it's not going to fit right. And you'll see me in a different video do something similar, but I take a lot more of this darties out and put it in the side seam. And I'm not going to do that in this video because this is all set up as if it were to become a princess line, and the other video is more traditional where it's got the bodice and skirt separated, but this one's going to be a princess line. So I'm leaving extra in. It still ends up here, but it's got a little bit extra because it's coming straight into the widest part down below. Okay, so I'm putting that back, and I'm not going to be really careful about where it is. This is more about marking the amount that's gone. rather than the exact spot to begin with. It's such a tiny amount. So that I'm going to want to mark the end of it right there, and it looks to me like I might have pulled out a little too much. It looks nice hanging there, but it looks like I'm going to have kind of a bulge at the end of it. It won't if I treat it like a princess line, but if that's just a dart, it might be a little bit too big. But this is where I'm going to want it to end. I'm going to look at where my princess line is, and they're going to be aiming at each other roughly right here. But I'm going to let a little bit out of that. And then I will end up fixing that on the dress form. I mean, when I get it off of the dress form on the paper. So I need to mark both sides of that. And instead of leaving the pin in, I marked the width of it right here. So it's just a tiny dart. She doesn't have much of a shoulder blade. And on a regular person, that would probably be a little bit bigger. But each individual person is very different. So I'm going to go ahead and fold that under, and I'm going to fold my flap toward the center. I could finger press it at this point and bring the one edge to match the other. This is kind of awkward and tiny. And I'm looking at where that edge is, and then I'm going to cut some more off. So I don't have quite a half an inch. But instead of trying to put the pin on both sides of the fabric, which was causing it to pucker a little bit, I'm going to tuck it in right here. And if I had a smaller pin head, that might be better, but I pinned it to the fabric. I'll pin it to the fabric over here. And then I'm going to take my front and make sure it's where it belongs. And right here, you can see I want to mark that line. So I can feel where that is. I want to mark the beginning of the line up here by the neck area. I'm marking that stitching line there, and I'm also marking that one. So I'm marking the beginning of the line. There's a pin head there, so it's not going exactly where I want it. And I need to mark the other end over here too. And because this is a hand stitched together thing, this line on the form may or may not be perfectly straight. So I mark the beginning and the end typically, and then I'll get my ruler and I'll put my ruler from one end to the other, and then I'll draw the line in between. And if I'm working on a real person, then usually this line is toward the middle or nearer the back of their neck, right below their ear. But it's kind of the highest point of the shoulder, where it disappears in the front and it disappears in the back. But you'll be surprised that it'll be kind of intuitive. You'll be able to find that on people because you've been wearing clothes for so long. It'll just look right. Okay, I really don't like that big pinhead. So I'm replacing that pin. Well, no, that's why I left that pin there in the first place, was because I knew it was a nice sharp pin. Okay, so this side I'm smoothing up. I want to keep my piece the same shape that I had to begin with. And then I'm kind of creasing it so that it's matching, because essentially what I want is to create a common line between the two pieces, and they turn out more accurate if you just do that right on the dress form. So I need to keep that line straight. And I'm folding the one side over to match the other. And I don't think I'll be able to do it on this one, maybe. But rather than pinning it directly to the dress form like I did right there, I'm going to get a more accurate look if I pin the fabric to itself and leave it not connected to the dress form, so that it just floats on top. That's easier to do on a larger size though. Okay, so that's what you're looking for, a common line between the two. And I'll often put a notch that comes straight from the dart, or maybe I'll come over here and put a notch where they join. And while I've got the two necks in position, I will find that plain change where the stitching line is and mark it. And instead of having the neckline come up this high, on full scale you usually come down a ½ inch in women's wear, and then you would blend that line. So because this is half scale, I used a 1/4 inch. Then you would blend a nice smooth curve between the two, and that would be more comfortable. But it depends on what kind of a shirt collar you're using. Traditionally, men's wear is clear up there. Okay, so right angle at the back of the neck, that would be a good quiz question. Center back neck and front neck are going to be a right angle. And then those two right angles are going to be connected by smooth curve. So this, whether it's here or here, it's going to be a right angle. Smooth curve going around. And then this is never a right angle because it's too sharp of a curve. But between the two, you've got a total of 180. It's just not divided by a 90-degree angle. Also a good quiz question. Okay, so that's the neck area. And with the neck area done, and the shoulder, that's going to stay in position and hang like that. And while we're right here, we'll work on the armhole a little bit. I'm going to start by taking some of this extra out. But because I'm not sure where I'm going to be right here, I'm not going to get too close to that side. And you can see where the bottom of the plate is over here, and it looks like I'm about 3/8 of an inch below the bottom of the plate right there. So that's what I'm going to aim for on the other side. So that's going to be probably a little lower than that. But it's easier to cut off more than add. Okay, so I'm going to put some little clips here. First I'm going to draw that same, to see how it's just picking up that plane change really easily as you go around. And then somewhere around level with the armhole, you have to do the bottom and blend the two together, just like I showed at the beginning. So right there is going to be the edge. Then we're going to have a dart. And if I try to put the dart in higher, it's going to have a weird angle. So I'm going to take it as close as I can to the shortest length. I also want to look at where the plane change is with my bust point. And in the book, it will explain that you can have your bust area, your darts, as long as they end within that circle, that's good. But what I'm looking at right here is as I come together with that plane change, that's where I'm going to put that mark. And I could probably go anywhere within this space and it's going to be okay, and maybe even a little bit bigger. But this is the line that's going to come down and join my dart further down. So do you see how the dart isn't coming all the way to the bust point? When we work with patterning them flat pattern, you always will want to take that out. You don't want the dart to come all the way to the point, or you get that Madonna costume effect from the 80s. So that's the width of my dart. I don't need to draw the whole thing. That's how wide it's going to be. And that might be a little too snug. That's taken out all of my ease. So I'm going to separate that a little bit and come just outside of it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and trim out a little bit more right there. You can hear my two little dogs arguing over their spot on the pillow. I try to keep them out, but you know, if you have pets, they're adorable, but they're noisy. So if I come down here, I want to blend this line without coming in too far. You want to keep it as close to the armhole as possible. And that's where, when you're working on a real person, this space is easier, but you don't want to come out too far. It's always easier to move it out than it is to move it in. So I've marked both sides of the dart, the circle. I'm going to end up changing that a little bit, but my dart's never going to get closer to the actual bust point than 1/4 of an inch away, unless I'm making a costume. And now I'm blending this side. I want to make sure I've got a right angle on both sides right here. And then I'll just blend that one into it. And I'll clean up some of this when I get it to the paper. But I want you to see as close as possible to what it's supposed to look like. So the rest of the way down here, when I'm working with this side seam, I'm going to pinch straight in so that I get the same, if I mark this line and I do the same amount on both sides, then I'm going to have the same angle on both sides. The front side seam and the back side seam will have the same angle. And that isn't necessarily important to have when you're working on something that has a waistline seam. But if you're getting rid of your waistline seam and making a princess line, it's essential that you have the same angle on both sides. So that's what we have right now. I've got a few little wrinkles. It doesn't like that pin there, so if I move that over and smooth it out, put my pin back, then that goes away, which means I'm going to change that curve very slightly, but that little bit makes a big difference. And I want to make sure that I haven't moved things. And it's easy to move them. When you've got a live person and they're breathing, every once in a while you have to just pause and make sure everything is staying in place. We're going to focus on the lower portion now. And I'm looking at how much darting I have. I want the center of this one to be parallel here, but I can adjust that on the paper, as well as the front one. So I know I'm going to come in at least this far with this one, and a little bit farther. I'm keeping my grain line straight all the way down. And that's bringing it into its smallest amount. And right here, because I already know I'm going to need to clip that, I'm going to clip it to the pin. I don't want to clip it all the way, but I know when I start taking it in, that will cause a wrinkle. So I've clipped that a little bit. And then here in the front, I want my line's going to come straight down here. And if I want to, I can kind of measure over to it. It's just slightly less than 2 inches. So I'm aiming for about there with it. But since I can't tell exactly, that's why it's better to have gingham check, which is this. So it would be easier to follow the line on that. So if I kind of start that, I'm going to come in right here, but I want to anchor here at the waist. So the narrowest part of your body is your natural waistline. Even if you want to wear your pants lower or your shirts higher, when you're creating a basic pattern, you want to be aiming at the narrowest part of the body. So I'm going to make sure that this is anchored right there, so that when I tug against it, I can't pull it too far. That's harder to do on a live person, but if you have them wearing a leotard, you can pin to their leotard. I usually will put a snug elastic around their waist that I can pin to. Sometimes if you have, depending on what you're wearing under, you don't want a bulky waistband on a live person, but something around their waist is really helpful. Okay, so my narrowest point is going to be here, and I'm going to take that in slowly. And you can see how I'm starting to get some diagonal wrinkles. So I want to make sure this is secure, not over here, but over here, so it stays put. I don't want to pull it, and that's why I started clipping that. And now because that's clipped, I can pinch in a little bit further. So I'm also going to clip a little bit right here, and that will release some of the tension. And in front, I'm going to pinch that in a little bit too, and I'm coming straight down from the bust point. You can't move the bust point, so this dart has to come straight down from there, the center. The dart does. Okay, so I've created some wrinkles, but I can smooth them out of the front. This one has a wrinkle, but if I smooth it, it goes away. So I can clip that a little bit. I don't want to clip too deep, but it looks like that's coming together nicely, and that's roughly where it's going to be. And then I'll just take this straight down. So you come straight down from your widest point. So I can take that pin in deeper right there. And the back looks good. But how's the front looking? Well, if you look at the back, her gluteus area is wider than her shoulder area. And in front, her bust area is wider than her mush ball area. So if I end up taking this all the way down, and I have an actual seam that goes down there, that's going to disappear in the princess line. And in back, that's why I was saying this seam seems a little bit big. It's going to disappear into the dart area. And that might not make as much sense right now, but hang on to that thought and it will make sense eventually. So this line I'm just going to bring straight down. And that part will probably be easier to do on the paper. But it helps to see it if you have it pinned into the general position. So that's going to come down like a regular side seam. This dart is going to end at the widest point. So I'm looking for a plain change there again. So since I'm not sure exactly where it's going to end, I'm going to mark across there. And then I'll do the same thing in front. But in front, if I have a really tight skirt, I can take it in that much. But this is not a bad amount of ease just to leave in it. So it will depend on what we're using it for. In most of your classes, you'll learn about leaving ease and how important that is. And I agree with that, but when I'm making a basic pattern like this, I like to mark where the actual minimum amount is, so that if I'm making something like a corset or a swimsuit, I know where 0 is. And then I will add the ease to it later. So this is now coming in. I don't want to pull the front too far forward, so I'm kind of doing them together as a group and working back and forth in between. So that's looking nice. And I can take this one in a little bit more tight. And I've got wrinkles there, but if I can smooth them out, then it's okay. This wrinkle's a problem, but I think that's where I've got this pin. And some of them aren't going to completely disappear until this is clipped or sewn. So that one is bumping into that stitching line seam. So I'm going to ignore that one. And instead of pinning these, I'm going to mark them with the pencil or the pen. So that one looks like it's in far enough. That pin I'm taking out and just kind of smoothing a little bit. I'll put it back. So that pretty much disappeared, and that's working. So other than marking, I'm almost finished with this. And other than the talking, that would have only taken me a few minutes. But I think it's more important to explain it carefully when you're listening. And this is wanting to angle off a little bit further that way. So I'm going to force it over here, but I will finish that off on the paper too. I'm putting a little too much right there, so it will stay. I don't usually pin all the way down, but I think this is going to be easier to see if I do. That pin is not our friend. So what's important to me about marking this is not so much where I put the line here, because that's going to work out better on paper, but the amount that I pinch out right here. So I'm making sure that I mark both sides of where that comes into. It's actually a little deeper than the pin. And then from here, I'm going to have that center line is going to be my center. This is going to be where my dart ends and back. And you'll watch me fix that on the paper. And this one's going to end right here. And I'm going to mark where I think it's going to be. And then I'll make sure those all align nicely on the paper before I finish it. So the important thing is marking the beginning, the middle, and the amount on both sides, and the end. And then truing and balancing it later happens on the paper. And I've still got it nice and smooth around here. So this one, when I mark this is actually going to have to be curved until it gets to the widest point, and then from here down, it will be perfectly straight. And then on the other side, I'm marking that curve again. And I'll clean that up on the paper too. And from here, it looks like this can come in a little bit tighter. But there again, ease is your friend. But we will add the ease afterward. Because the more information you can get when you're draping, the better. Okay, so that's the top. I've marked it on both sides. And it will taper in. This will be a straight line here. And I've got my curved line, and then it's going to be straight down from there. And the same thing here. I'm marking the width of my pin amount. I already know where my bust point is. And if I were marking the end of a dart on this, and in one of the other videos I did just a skirt that doesn't have this extra amount in it, but I want to look for the widest point, and she has almost no mush ball there, but it would technically end at that level. And from here down, well, it could go as low as here, but I'm thinking it would be the top one. From here down, it's just going to come straight out, and we'll be taking that out. But that will make more sense when you watch the other video. This is a different, this is more learning about how to true and balance and keep your fabric and your patterns balanced so that they hang nicely. While I'm here, I'm also going to mark the bottom and the top of this tape, or her waistband. If I were working on a real person, instead of doing that, I would use, like, well, I usually will just wrap 1/8 of an inch elastic around their waist and mark that all the way around. as it is, I'm going to use the center of where this tape is. So like right here, halfway between, that's actually where my waist is. When I make my pattern, that's where that's going to end up. So right there is her waist. But because I can feel the tape, that's where I marked it. So that is finished, and I can take it off and make a paper pattern out of it that I can use for making different styles or my final project or whatever I'm working on. And that's how you start out with something that's going to fit. When you start from a flat pattern, everything based on this will come back and fit this dress form. So I'm working on form number 13 right now, and I'm going to write that on here. And I often will write the date. If it's a person, I'll write their name on it and the date. But you've got level lines, perpendicular parallel lines. And this one, that tape must be a double layer right there. So and then I often will go back and put in little notches so that I know I'm going to get it in the right place. But these two are straight across from each other. This is one line. And now I'm going to take it off the dress form and put it on paper. And as I go, I'm making sure that everything is marked. So right here, it doesn't look like I got both sides of that. But I have the end, and this is the one I really want. So both sides of that pin are marked. Both sides of that one. I'm going to try and leave my shoulder pin together. So you can see where the darts are going to be, but this one looks like it's not quite straight under that, so I'm going to end up scooting it one way or the other. That's why marking the total amount to get rid of is more important than the placement of it. Except for your bust point. That has to be where it belongs. Okay, so I've left the shoulder pin together so I can make sure that I've got that well marked before I take it apart. Draped basic princess pattern. Pre-balanced. And here I've zoomed in on the armhole from the other side. You can see where that ridge is. And then the two lines just straight down, marking halfway in between. So that's where the side seam goes, is the middle of the armpit. Otherwise your sleeve wraps around and does funny things.